Today, January 19th, is the second day of Super GM tournament in Wijkenzee, Netherlands. We're going to analyze two most interesting games of the second round, as well as one of the games from round one that didn't make to my yesterday's video that you can watch on this channel. Today we start with a game between Fabiano Caruana, the best American chess player and the highest rated player in this tournament, and the player representing the host nation Netherlands, Jordan van Forest. Obviously a very strong grandmaster, but his rating is 120 points lower than Caruana. Caruana opens the game with the move d4. d5 is Van Forest's answer. Knight f3, regular development of the knight. e6, knight f4, and that's actually called the Zukertort variation, but it has some ideas from the London system when the bishop goes to f4. c5 immediately more of an aggressive move. The other move c6 would lead to more positional play. c5 is more active, which immediately tells us that Jordan Van Forest is not afraid of his opponent. e3, regular move here, developing the knight on c6, c3. You see this pawn structure c3, d4, e3. That's the normal pawn structure in this particular opening. Bishop d6, trying to exchange this black squared bishop for white. And bishop goes to g3, knight h6 is played. I'm sorry, I missed this move. Knight h6. Unusual way to develop the pieces. Normally, the knight goes to f6 in pretty much every opening, but knight h6 is a creative way by Van Forst to treat this position. And eventually, the knight will go to f5. So that's obviously not the first time it was played, but this is very unusual still way to treat this position. Knight d3, I'm sorry, bishop d3, black castles short side, knight b on d2, developing the pieces, b6 trying to open b7 square for the bishop, queen e2, bishop b7, the development is almost over, and now things begin to happening in this game. White takes on c5, and b takes c5, obvious response, and e4, very practical move and very, the usual play in this position is to break the center. Um, Bishop b8, kind of looking at pawn on b2, which is kind of weak right now in this position for white. White plays e5, kind of a twofold kind of move because e5, on the other hand, blocks the black bishop, so that's good news. Bad news is also blacks your own bishop, which is on g3, and this bishop becomes really he is without many moves in this position. So the black bishop is under attack, so obviously it goes back to c7, white castles short side, and the black goes knight f5. And the opening is over. And despite kind of unusual way to play it, black has a very, very pleasant position here. White goes bishop f4. They still want to protect and keep the black square bishop on the board because one of the reasons is to protect the pawn on e5. c4 attacking the white square bishop, which goes back to c2, and bishop a6. Bishop a6 is the move to open up the rook and attack the pawn on b2. The easiest way to protect the pawn on b2 is by the move of rook b1. d4, very aggressive, very good looking move for black, opens up the position, and visually black is better here. And again, this is Fabiano Caruana playing white. against an opponent who is, at least rating-wise, is a lot weaker than him. But this position is totally in black's favor, and white has to be really careful of how they treat this position. Obviously, d3 is on the horizon, forking the bishop and the queen. So white takes on c4, and the knight actually, I'm sorry, the knight is actually pinned. And black plays queen d5, activating the queen, going to the central square, and also attacking the pinned knight on c4. White has to be really careful here. They play b3, protecting the knight on c4, and black takes the pawn on c3. So white allowed black to take the pawn, but the most important thing, they protected the knight on c4. Black pieces still look more active, and I personally like their position more. Rook d1 attacking the queen. Queen goes to c5. Now finally white decided to take the knight on f5, and the reason they do it now, because after black takes the bishop back, after queen c2, it's a double attack on both pawns. Black takes the knight on c4, and here goes a very important move, queen c3. And the reason this is an important move, because normally in this type of position, after somebody takes your knight on c4, you kind of automatically go bc4. But in this particular case, that's a losing move, because the rook takes on b1, and after rook b1, queen c4, and this pawn on c3 becomes very dangerous, and eventually it will queen, and because of this pawn, black's position is winning. So therefore, queen c3, queen takes c3 is a very important move. Position is equal at this point. And bishop b6, kind of natural looking move, attacking the pawn on f2 with the battery of the bishop and the queen. Bishop e3, normal response to protect the pawn, to attack the queen, everything at the same time. Queen b4, and in this particular position, unfortunately for black, white is gaining advantage, and especially when the player playing white is one of the best players in the world, definitely a top 5 player in the world, Fabiano Caruana. He will obviously he knows what to do in this type of positions and how to transform a very small advantage into a winning position. So after queen b4, queen takes c4. Now here it's important to understand that the bishop is still under attack and the queen is under attack. And you cannot save both pieces. So queen b4, queen takes c4, exchange of the queens, exchange of the bishops, h6, prophylactical move just in case, so there would be no checkmate on the 8th rank. And in this particular position, what happens is that white has an extra pawn. Now, this is an isolated pawn, this is isolated pawn, and those are double isolated pawns. So those pawns are not really pretty, are not really good, but it's an extra pawn. And the most important pawn in this position is the pawn on c4. And that pawn eventually is gonna decide the game, because that's the passing pawn. That's the pawn that has no obstacles on its way in terms of black pawns. Pawn on a2 has an obstacle on a7. Pawn on e5 has an obstacle on f7. So you cannot really move it forward so easily. But pawn on c4 is the one that will decide the game. White plays rook b5. Rook c8 is a mistake, and then it's a mistake because uh, the reason it's a mistake because the best way to continue and to actually um, make white life more difficult was to play a6, and that move led attacking the rook, and that move led to some more complicated lines. After rook c8, white's game becoming pretty easy. The king goes to the closer to the center of the board. Rook d6, knight d8. Knight d8, it's always, not always, but when you move the knight back, it kind of tells you that something went wrong. So you kind of go very passive. And the reason you have to make this move for black right now, because after any other move, like king e8, for example, this is the threat. You can take actually the knight on c6 with the rook, because so white wins a piece in this particular variation, and also you cannot take here because you can win it different ways, but you can just check, and then the next move you win the rook. So therefore knight d8 is pretty much the only move in this position. Knight goes to the middle of the board, attacking another pawn on f5. G6 protects that pawn, and after rook takes b8, rook takes b8, pawn on c5 going forward, and it just moves forward, and very difficult to stop. Knight b7 attacks the rook, and actually you can sacrifice this rook and still win this position, but obviously you don't need to do this, as if you're Caruana, he just moves the rook away in d5, and goes back to d8, c6, and in this position Jordan Van Forest resigned because c7 is on the way. You don't have to lose right away. You can go rook c8, and you can win this position slowly. You need to get your king into the game, and eventually the king will just get uh, into this square c5 or d6. The rook will move to d7, and eventually the pawn on c7 will promote. And Fabiano Caruana shows you why he is one of the, if not the top grandmaster in the world. And his endgame technique is on par with Magnus Carlsen, who is considered the best endgame player of all time. The next game we're going to look today is the game between Nodirbek Abdusadorov from Uzbekistan against Leon Mendonça from India. In this particular game, Abdusadorov started with e4, e6, d4, d5. That's a French defense. And Abdusadorov plays a variation that's one of most popular, but there are three main moves here: knight c3, knight d2, and e5. And he plays e5, which is an advanced variation in which black are trying to attack the pawn chain, but with the move of c5, c3 protects it. So that's the typical pawn chain in French defense. Knight c6, all theory. Knight f3, queen b6, with more pressure on d4. And here comes a move that really is not played much at all. A4. It was played in the past, but very rarely. The main move here is a3 with the idea of b4. So a4 was really confusing, but it worked. It worked because Leon Mendonça, the young Indian grandmaster, he probably never saw this move in his life, and actually got confused and lost this game kind of easily. So let's take a look. After a4, takes on d4, takes on d4, knight h6. See, the same idea as we had in the previous game. The only difference is that in that game, Von Forest couldn't move the knight on f6. I'm sorry, he could move the knight on f6. He just chose the move to move the knight on h6. But in this particular case, there is no f6 square. e7 is more of a traditional square where the knight will develop and then to g6. But Indian Grandmaster goes to h6 with the eventual idea of moving the knight on f5. Bishop b5 pinning the knight. Immediately the knight moves to f5 where it wanted to go with with more pressure on d4. Knight c3, bishop d7, unpinning the knight. Castle, a6, bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, knight e2, protecting this pawn on d4 one more time. Bishop e7 with the idea of castling, b3. And here, I mean, I cannot explain the next move. Long cast. Absolutely unexplainable move that makes black position immediately worse, because this is where white have open files. C file is open. A and B pawns can immediately go into attack, and black king is immediately in danger. So long castle was a very strange move. Short castle would be more standard, and the game would continue for a long time. But after long castle, the grandmaster from Uzbekistan easily dismantles black's position. Bishop d2, developing the bishop, opening the c1 square for the rook. King goes away from the c file. b4, immediately b4, you don't have to wait for other pieces to support the pawn. You can just sacrifice this pawn, because after, let's say, bishop takes b4, you go rook b1, and the most important thing you need to do in this position is to open this position, and b4 does exactly that. So obviously black doesn't take the pawn on b4, they play rook c8, and then the white plays rook b1 to prepare the move b5. The bishop goes back ahead of time, so to say. Still b5. The idea is to open the file for the rook. Takes, rook c4, queen b3, g5. Now black are trying to create some counter chances on the king side, but it's too slow. You can see that by the time they develop some attack here, white are just much quicker, and the king is not protected. White king is totally protected. So the game continued for just a little bit more. h3, not allowing g4. h5, still trying to play g4, but that allows white just to take the pawn on g5 because it's not protected. Attacking the queen on b3, and the queen just goes away. And now white can continue attacking on a file. Black takes the pawn. Knight g3. Not 100% sure why that was necessary, but pretty much anything wins in this position. After bishop takes g5 and knight takes f5, e takes e5, knight takes g5. You can see that black attack is over. You cannot do much here on the king side. Even after black takes the pawn on d4, Black has now an extra pawn, but it's not most important part of this position. What most important here is the king is weak, the files are open, and white takes immediate advantage of that with the move rook a1. Rook a1, the threat is to check on a8 and at, at least take the rook on h8 with the next move. So king c7, protecting from this threat at this point, and just knight takes f7. Takes a pawn, protects and threatens and attacks the rook on h8. The rook goes away on g8. Knight d6, attacking another rook. Rook b4, queen a5 check. Position for white is totally winning. Black really don't have many moves. Queen b6 is pretty much the only one. Queen takes d5. Another pawn is taken. Rook is under attack. The king is still under pressure. Rook d8 and knight c4. And Leon Mendonça resigned in this position. And the reason he resigned is because the queen is under attack. And if, let's say, the queen goes somewhere, for example, on c6, then there is a check from a5 and black loses a rook. So that's nice geometry here. And what else black can do here? Not much, really. If, let's say, queen b5, then there is a checkmate in two moves. Queen d6 check and rook a8 checkmate. Very nice and very easy win for Abdusadorov. And everything started with the wrong move, long castle. One more game we're gonna take a look today, and that's actually the game from round one. And the reason I wanted to show you that game because yesterday I analyzed three games from round one that were decided, and one of the players won the game. And this particular game that we're gonna discuss right now ended in a draw, but that was a very, very exciting game and one of the most interesting draws you're gonna see. So that's why I decided to use this time to actually take a look at the game between Pragnananda, that's a young Indian grandmaster with a rating of 2741, and again another Bekam Desadora from Uzbekistan, who we just saw winning round two, but now it's round one, and he is playing black. So the starting move is c4, that's English opening, usually a very pragmatic, usually very positional type of opening, and the beginning was as advertised positional and nothing much was happening, and the whole storm on the board happened later. e5, knight c3 developing, bishop b4, standard move, knight d5 attacking the bishop, a5, knight f3 again developing, d6 opening the white square bishop, a3 attacking the bishop on b4, bishop goes back to c5, e3, c6 attacking the knight on d5, and counterattack. d4 is a counterattacking move, attacking the bishop on c5. You don't always have to move back with your pieces that are attacked. You can attack your opponent pieces. So d4 is a very aggressive, nice move. Bishop goes back to a7. The knight is still under attack. Now it has to go back to c3, developing the knight on d7 standard. Queen c2. Sometimes queen goes to c2 to make sure that the bishop from c8 doesn't go to f5, because that's a nice diagonal for the black bishop, and the queen c2 protects the square f5. Knight f6. Bishop d2, that's just developing moves. Castle, and here the game started to get interesting. Anytime then the castles are in different directions. Short castle for black, long castle for white. the game becomes more interesting because white now has attacking plans on the king side, and the black has attacking plans on the queen side. Rook e8, h3, probably preparing g4, e4, and after e4, it was the knight was under attack, so it went back to h2, d5, trying to close the center for black. White goes g4. Basically, that was the plan. Computer doesn't like it, but that's a normal human move. You start attack on the king with this move g4. Black takes on c4 and g5 attacking the knight. And knight goes to the center of the board, which is always good, with the move knight d5, but pawn in e4 remains not protected because the queen protects the knight and you cannot take it. So the pawn on e4 is lost, but the position is clearly in black's favor, and the reason it's in black's favor because their attack on the white king here is much quicker than white's. So black goes queen e7, attacking the knight. The knight has to retrieve on g3, b5, immediately b5. Very dangerous position for white. Knight f5 attacking the queen. The queen goes to e6 and h4. So white is attacking on the king side, but it's very slow. There is no time. Black is much quicker. c5. Anytime you need to attack, you need to open files. This move allows opening files, opening diagonals, and breaking the pawn structure. So c5 is a very nice move. Bishop h3. So again, black is attacking here on the uh, queen side, and white are trying to create some counterplay on the king side with the move bishop h3, which could attack the queen. It's like a discovery type of attack, it's called. And the move knight h6 is the threat right now because that's a check. And after the check, you can take the queen. So the queen has to go away, and it does go away, and a6. So more and more black pieces are gathering on the queen side to attack the white. h5, again, white is continuing with their plan. They're trying to attack here on the queen side, on the king side, I'm sorry. But black again is fast. b4. Bishop f1, attacking the pawn on c4. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. For black, they take the pawn at d4, they open files, they open diagonals. They don't care about the pawn on c4. Pawns are not important in this type of positions. Initiative is. Bishop takes c4, the queen is under attack. Doesn't matter. b3. b3, kind of nice tactical shot. Actually, computer prefers just a simple move queen c6 in this position. But you know, when you're playing with initiative and you want to really do damage to a position, you don't want to just move the pieces from the attack, you want to attack yourself. So b3 is attacking move. Queen takes b3, it still protects the bishop here. Knight c5. So one of the reasons b3 was played because knight goes to c5 with the tempo. The tempo meaning it's attacking the opposing queen. So the queen goes away on a2. Knight d3 check. Kings go to b1. And a brilliant move, bishop f5. Look at this move. The queen is under attack. The black queen is under attack for like 3 moves already. 4 moves. And the grandmaster from Uzbekistan really doesn't care about it. Bishop f5. Now, you might think that they lose a queen. It's not really true because after bishop takes a6, the black immediately take the queen back by the discovery check, discovery attack, knight b4 check. So the knight moves, but the check is from the bishop. Kings go to a1. Black takes the queen, and after king takes a2, the pawn takes on e3. Black's position is winning, but it's not so easy still. Knight takes e3, rook c1. It was under attack, so the rook went away. And another move that makes sense, putting the rook on the b file, rook b8, and bishop a5. And in this particular position, black remains better, but white, all the worst things are already behind white, and also white has only 5 minutes, and black has 30 minutes. Big difference. But after knight c2, bishop c4, not easy to explain those type of moves. First of all, white is severely under time pressure, minute 25 remaining. Bishop d4, b3, and here, most important part of the game. Rook c8 is a mistake. The move that continued the pressure and could win the game is rook a8. And that's basically why I wanted to show this game, especially because of the ending. Rook a8. And it feels like a natural move is b4. You protect the bishop. And this move loses to a very, very nice tactical shot, rook e2. Rook e2 is a great move. And the reason it's a great move, because after bishop takes e2, you can actually stop the video and try to find a checkmate in 3 moves for black. I'll pause it here. I hope you found it. Bishop e6, bishop e6 check, bishop c4, bishop takes c4, king b1, and the checkmate by the knight. Knight takes a3. Beautiful checkmate with the knight, and it shows the strength, the power of bishops. So that's how black could win this game, but unfortunately didn't find this nice shot. Also, after rook e8 and b4, rook e2, you don't have to take the rook on e2. You can play, let's say, something like king b1, and then there is a checkmate in 1. So that's how the game could have ended, but it didn't. So rook c8, rook f1, and here already white has a great move. After knight e3, white takes the bishop with the rook. Rook takes f5, and the reason it's possible because after knight takes f5, there is a great move g6 using the pin. And the pin is from the bishop here. The arrows need to go straight. So the bishop pins this pawn, and after take, you cannot take here. The king would be under attack. So knight d6, logical move, protecting this pawn. Still take. You cannot take with the knight because it would be pinned and it would eventually get lost after knight f8. I'm sorry, king f8, another pin on the knight. And now black takes on b4, ab, and after this repetition of moves, both players agreed to a draw. So it was a draw, and the reason I showed this game because I thought it was amazing draw. It was an amazing game, and unfortunately for Black, they could actually ended it in a spectacular fashion, but they didn't. So 2 rounds are behind us. Let's take a look at the standings. There are 5 players with 1.5 points after 2 rounds. That's 2 Indian grandmasters, the world champion Gukesh Gidamaraju, Ramesh Babu Pragnananda, American player Fabiano Caruana, and there's Zabrak Abdasadurov, who was the hero of our video today with 2 games shown, and the best German grandmaster, Vincent Keimer. So this is it for round 2. I'll see you tomorrow for round 3. Thank you for watching.